All right, so hi everyone. My name is Bailey. I'm a career advisor here at UNT Dallas, and today we're going to go over resume tips for the School of Business and Education. Or not. Here we go. So thanks for joining us today. So let's go ahead and get started. So here are a couple tips I have kind of lined out just to kind of show everyone, kind of starting from the basics of what a resume should look like. So first, we have to think about what experiences we have, what skills we have, and how we want it formatted. So there's 3 different types of formatting for a resume. We have chronological, which that puts all your professional work history like in order. This is great if you don't have any employment gaps. It fills right in. It kind of shows the timeline of where you've been and what you're interested in. So then we have functional. So maybe if you have years of experience, or maybe if you have that employment gap, a functional resume might be more your style. So how you do a functional resume is you break it down by skills, and then you'll list the descriptions of your experiences with that skill, which I have some examples later on in the PowerPoint, but that's definitely an option. And then maybe if we have a little bit of both, you have a combination resume. So this is where you have your professional experience still lined up and have that reverse chronological order, but also you have a skills section kind of describing the experiences you have and why they're important to that job. So kind of think about what best works for you, your experiences that you have, and think about how you would want it set up. It's also important to pick a clean format, making sure like your margins, which I'm kind of skipping ahead, but your margins, making sure the font's nice and like readable, just making sure it's not too small or too big and too bold, like it's taking up too much room, like you're trying to fill in all the gaps, so making sure it's nice and clean. So the second one would be making sure you include your name and your contact information. So making sure you have your name up there. A lot of people always maybe forget their email, phone number, even include like your city and state so that way they know where you're coming from. Also include your LinkedIn. That's so important. So many people don't put that on there. But also when you put your LinkedIn, make sure you include the shortened URL, which you can do that once you log into LinkedIn and click on your profile, and then you can click, like I think it's at the top right, you can edit URL. So like mine is like LinkedIn/Bailey Bracken instead of all of those numbers and random letters where it's hard for employers to type in. So it's easier for them to access. So making sure you also have a resume or summary or an objective. So making sure we don't use personal pronouns in there as well. I see that often in resumes, but making sure it's kind of like a short statement that uses active language to describe your relevant work experience and skills. Also, so sometimes people don't know the difference between your soft skills and hard skills. So I have some differences down here. So if we're looking for more of that functional resume or a combination, so here's what you kind of list. So for hard skills, you have like technical, which is like programming, data. If you work with like Prezi or Zoom or Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office, that's what you would list for your hard skills. And then for your soft skills, being more like interpersonal. So this would be like leadership, motivation, things like that. Also, so maybe if you're thinking about transferring to another field or another department, just kind of new area, it's really important to highlight transferable skills. So making sure you highlight teamwork, communication, things that are important in each department. And also another thing, making sure you do your research on these jobs. That's so important. So making sure you create a skill section with keywords that are relevant to the employer. Oftentimes I'll have the job description and my resume pulled up to the side, so that way I'm making sure I'm using the same language and even using some of those keywords. Let me make sure this is not anyone in the chat asking questions. Nope. All right, we're good. So also we are going to making sure we list your professional history with keywords. So like I said, doing your research. Sometimes you have an experience and it lines up perfectly, but you're not using those keywords or those experiences. So making sure you include that. Start with your most recent job and provide a short description, including the company name, time period in which you were employed, your job title, and a few key achievements that you did during your time there. A lot of people often forget your job title at that company. So making sure you include that so that way they know what experience you have and what you dealt with within that job. Also include your education section. That's kind of hard to say, but making sure you include your institution, date of attendance, and the degrees or areas that you studied. Also, if you wanted to, I've seen students even go into list like relative coursework under education, some honors, things like that. You can also add that in that section as well. I kind of tell them if you decide to do that, make that as like a little subheader, so maybe like italicize or bold or underline where they know it's important, but it's not a main header because it's still under that education section. So also making sure you consider optional, like adding different sections. So that way, if you have that significant white space on your resume, you can kind of fill that in. That can often be through like community service, honors and achievements, skills, things like that would be a great way to add that, and also achievements. So things like that, way to fill in those white spaces. So I kind of mentioned this earlier, format your resume. So making sure you guys have a nice clean font and font size. So with School of Business and Education, they want a pretty clean black and white resume, no graphic design, nothing too crazy, just very clean and readable. Making sure you utilize those margins. So I always tell people to, I think your basic 1-inch margins or even a little bit further, like the narrow would be perfect. Kind of depending how much information you have in your resume, that's for you to decide. Also bullet points. So making sure you can even use these little dashes like I have on this presentation, or you can use bullet points through Word, whatever you use to make your resume. Because sometimes people will just write a paragraph under that job and employers won't they only look at your resume for like 10 to 20 seconds. So most of the time they're not going to want to read that paragraph. So making sure you break it down into bullet points so that way it's easy for them to scan and pick up the highlights. Also headers. So making sure, we talked about that earlier, kind of maybe doing subheaders, but making sure you have headers to break it down so that way they know what they're looking at in each section. And it's, like I said, easier for them to read. You can have some subheaders in like education, things like that, but making sure you have your main headers, which would be like your contact information, education, work experience, skills, and your optional sections we talked about earlier. Also, making sure you proofread your resume, making sure you ask your friends, colleagues, professors, the Career Center, that's what we're here for, to review your resume. And I know sometimes you can think it looks really good. Like one time I got my resume to a perfect point and I misspelled like something as little as like October just because when I was typing, my fingers got ahead of me. So luckily my friend pointed that out before I submitted it anywhere. But just little important things like that. Sometimes when you're typing, you can just have a mistype. Making sure they find that, and that way you kind of look like your best self. So this is the most important to me, making sure you tailor your resume for each position. So making sure you go back and doing those keywords and making sure you're including the right experiences or kind of customizing it to fit in the right experiences to show you have that potential. So for each job, adjust the keywords in the skill section and make sure it's a great fit for the employers. So now I kind of have a video for y'all to watch. So it's just kind of video to kind of summarize what we just talked about. Let me make sure there's no one asking questions in the chat. All right, perfect. All right, so let's look at the example documents I have, okay? So first, this side is going to be business. So over here, this is a functional resume. So as you can see, we have career experience and we have administration, training, development, and customer service. And so this is an example resume I found off online. So we have kind of descriptions of under each experience, why they have that attained skill, just kind of breaking it down. And then also below, we have career history. So we still have where they worked at, but instead of like just kind of describing what they did at each job, it's like a summary of each one. So that's how it would look like for business. And then on this side will be education, which I know is kind of fuzzy, but you can kind of see the main point again, teaching, management, and counseling. So like I said, they still have their employment history right below, but under each skill, they have that bullet point describing what they did. Like for this first one, we see taught subjects in math and science, English for grades 2nd to 4th. And so they're still describing how they have that obtained skill. So now this is business chronological. So as you can see, we have, this is, like I said, this is an example, so it's kind of vague, but just for y'all to get the idea, and feel free to ask any questions. So as you can see, everything lines up perfectly. We know what Katie was doing from March 2008 to January 2009, and we can see she got a new job, and then also she got a new job again. So everything lines up. She has all of the job descriptions, education toward the bottom, which we usually like to keep it toward the top, but to each their own. She has a little professional summary right here, and then her contact information. So this would be chronological for education. So we have their LinkedIn, Twitter, all their personal info, but also we can see right here that their job timeline. That way we know what they're doing, what they've done the past time, things like that. Let's see if we have a question. What about a resume with a picture? I've seen some templates on Word and that are more colorful. So I usually advise students, and Arthur might can chime in on this, I usually advise students not to use a picture because it's another reason for them just to like look and get to know a profile. Sometimes, I don't know, it's just something I advise students not to do. Let them see who you are on paper, your experiences, education, things like that. Arthur, do you have another reason, or do you think they should use pictures sometimes?
So great question. I would say that you have to look at several different factors. So to give you an example of a time when you would utilize a picture, say for instance having a person's headshot on their resume, would be if they're applying for an acting role. So that's a really good example. However, mostly for people applying for jobs in the business arena or the education arena, it's mostly conservative. Therefore, I wouldn't put a headshot on a resume. However, one would say, for instance, utilize ones that may have infographics. So maybe not necessarily a headshot or a picture, but maybe like symbols. Maybe that could work to display statistics or say a person's level of proficiency as it relates to a particular skill. So headshots, no, but yes, if for certain roles, pictures, yes, but how you use them strategically, but not just to have something on there. And I hope that between the two of our answers, hopefully there is an answer within for you, and we could talk specifically about it as it relates to your specific situation. If you would like to make an appointment with us, hence that's why we're here.
Right. Also, I've seen where students create like their own little logo in that little bubble of their initials. That's kind of more graphic design though. Another option for you to kind of fill in that bubble, kind of cool, and gives it your little personal flair. But just another option. But great question. That's a lot
Actually,
on templates as well. So
I think on the resume sample for Jill, it has pictures at the bottom.
yes, so we have a little graphic down here. So she has her skills listed out. So she kind of shows where her curriculum design, she's very advanced, and time management, she's excellent. And then we have differentiated instruction. She's kind of intermediate, like she might need to learn a little bit more. But in then student safety, she's also advanced. So that's another way to showcase your graphic design skills and your skills in general.
I had a question. Any tips you guys would recommend? Like, I'm in the School of Education, and I'm currently taking Professor Graham, and we're trying to do our resume. But the only thing about me is that I don't have any like teacher assistant experience or anything. So how can I kind of any tips on doing my resume to kind of put it out there for schools to see?
Yeah. So
go ahead, Bailey. I'm sorry.
no, you're good. That was a really great question. So oftentimes I'll tell students to definitely utilize their volunteer experiences, or because that's just as valuable. So even if you volunteered anyway working with kids, like even if it was like at a daycare or just working at a camp, things like that, you can definitely put on there as well. But also maybe a great way to kind of look into would be more of a functional resume. So that way you can highlight the skills. Here, I'll go back. So for teaching, you can show like, and you can even put like your school projects and classroom experiences as well. to show you how you gain these skills. So that's definitely an option for you, kind of like this one. And you can always make an appointment with me and we can kind of go through and maybe find a better example than this one we have here. But this is definitely an option to put teaching. You can put your classroom experiences, volunteer experiences, and just that would be my advice. Arthur, do you want to chime in?
Yes, can you repeat the question was highlighting experience that goes on a resume, but not necessarily having observation and or teaching experience. So one of the things you definitely want to make sure you list all of your transferable skills on your resume. And I think Bailey, you definitely touched upon that. And also too, for the experience that you have, it's all about wording and how you sell it. And also including the appropriate action verbs and the appropriate skills that are transferred. We're able to meet with you one-on-one to discuss your case, and we can definitely help you to craft and create the resume that's going to help to highlight your skills in the education arena.
Bailey, I was having trouble lining in, but okay, so on this resume that we're doing for the education program, do we only list things that that have to do with education, like that we have been dealing with students, or like if you have a job with retail, you don't even put that in there?
No, I think you can definitely list both, and you can actually split it up on your resume where you can have two separate sections for experience. You could have one that has education experience and related work experience, where you could list the things that relates to the education arena. And you could also list your retail experience there, because there's definitely experience as it relates to customer service, leadership, communication, things that are definitely transferable and employers will want to know that you have. So absolutely, you would list it. It's just how you're going to list it.
Oh,
And so another pro, if you list like two, like I'll say relevant work experience and then work experience. So you would put relevant experience before the work experience. So that'll be the first thing on the resume the employers would see. Make sure I don't have any questions. So for font, there's not a certain one or font. I usually tell people to keep it around like 10 to 12. So that way, if you want to use your headers, maybe you want to do like 14. But your name obviously would be the biggest font. Keeping it like Times New Roman, those basic fonts, just kind of something really easy, making sure it's easy to read. So if you hand it, like I said, this is why it's important for people to proofread your resume. So if you choose a font and you're kind of iffy about it, it's important to make sure that you hand it over to someone, and as long as they can read it, it's a great font. Making sure it's just readable. Spacing is something you can play with your what you have. Sometimes spacing kind of gets tricky if you list the skills and bullet points and do columns. So it kind of depends, but I tell everyone to keep it simple with the basic 1 inch, like just kind of the standard word filter it already kind of comes in. Maybe you might need to get a little bit closer with bullet points and space it out, but there's not really a certain like standard to like certain numbers I can give you to make a resume. It's just kind of like depends on your information, if that makes sense. So what is a good job summary or objective for accounting jobs? So it kind of depends on your experience as well. So it's kind of hard to think one on the top of my head. It would be like undergraduate student currently an undergraduate student at UNT Dallas searching for an accounting jobs or internships to a high skill level of maybe recently graduating. Something simple like that. We can kind of go through some examples later. But let me get through. I want to show y'all one more resume before we get. So we also have the combination resume. So this is where you would have your skills listed and your experience. So here's also an example of a professional summary for accounting. So we're going to skip. So this one, she's a senior accountant. So this is someone kind of far down the road, but highly developed sense of organization, enables accurate flow of billing information and resolution. So she kind of lists, Marvin, sorry. He kind of lists his experiences, what he has within that role. So that's something you could also maybe list within the role, like your experiences in your classes as well. But as you can see, we have a skills section, and then we have our experience on here, and it's all reverse chronological order. And then here's one for education. So we have that professional profile, that's the skills section, and then also our work experience. So let me go over, so these are just some highlights to kind of like in the presentation, kind of like a summary of a resume. So making sure it's a short, concise document used for job applications. We usually like to keep it around 1 page. So it provides recruiters with a brief overview of your history. If you target at a specific job, making sure it's only 1 to 2 pages. We really like to try to keep it at 1. The goal of the resume is to make individuals stand out from the competition. And the resume doesn't have to be chronological order, so that's what we talked about, those different formats. It doesn't have to cover your whole career. It's just highly customizable to you. Some example sections, which we already kind of talked about, which contact, education, objectives, work experience, skills. Then optional sections would be awards, courses, community service, certifications. So here are my references from today, if y'all have any questions of where I pulled this information from. And then here is my contact info, bailey.bracken@UNT Dallas, school business and school education advisor. Also, how you make an appointment with me, you make an appointment on Handshake, and we have all those different appointments listed from resume to LinkedIn to cover letter to mock interviews. We're all here to help you find a job and get the best experience you can. And also, usually we'll be located on the 2nd floor of the Student Center, Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 6 p.m. And there's our phone number and our general email. So do we have any more questions, or did we cover everything? Feel free to send it in the chat.